Friends, I welcome you in this topic. In this session, I am going to discuss very crucial topic, economic growth and development. Friends, day in day out we hear about the economic growth, and especially nowadays we always hear that India's economic growth rate has been decreasing. It is one of the lowest in the recent decades, right? Then we also hear about the development. The development is not happening, growth is happening but development is not happening. So what is the difference between growth and development? So all these concepts we are going to discuss in this session, right? So in this session we will discuss about the economic growth. What is the meaning of economic growth? How do we calculate the economic growth? Then what are the limitations of the economic growth, right? And what are the indicators of the economic growth? After this we will discuss economic development. So again, in the economic development we will discuss the meaning, the indicators, and we will also discuss the differences between the economic growth and the economic development, so that we are very much clear that this is economic growth and this is economic development, right? So friends, I would like to know from you what comes to your mind when you hear about the word economic growth. So there are two words, economic and growth, and when anyone hears the economy, the very prominent word that comes to the mind is GDP, right? And growth means progress, increase. So can we say that economic growth is nothing but increase in the GDP, right? So if suppose this is the GDP value, this is year 2020, 21, this is 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016 and 2015, right? So this is indicating the GDP value. So this GDP is increasing from this to this to this and so on. So this is clearly indicating that GDP value is increasing, and that means economic growth, right? Now this economic growth, this is calculated with reference to the previous year, right? So for example, in 2020 the value of GDP is 1050 rupees. In 2019 it was rupees 1000, right? So if we compare from 2019 to 2020, there is an increment of rupees 50. So this 50 is the growth. This 50 is the growth. So we are comparing year on year. We are comparing year on year. And what is the figure of comparison? The figure of comparison is the GDP or the national income. And this GDP or national income, this can be at the aggregate level or this can be at the per capita level or per citizen level, right? Individual level. So it can be at any of the, it can be based on any of these two figures. But what we are doing is we are comparing the figure of 2019 with the 2020, and we are comparing the figure of 20 with the figure of 21, right? And so on. So this comparison happens over year, right? And can we see that there is only one variable which is being compared here, and that is nothing but GDP or national income. So can we see that economic growth is focusing upon the income part? It is single dimensional. It is single dimensional, right? It is single dimensional. And this GDP and national income, what does this indicate? So in simple words, this GDP and national income, it indicates the value of goods and services. So economic growth is indicating that there is increase in the value of production of goods and services from if we compare with the previous year. So this year the value of goods and services which have been produced in the country is more than the value of goods and services which were produced last year, right? So this is how this economic growth rate is indicating that these goods and services are increasing in terms of the value, the production is increasing, right? So this is more of the market phenomena, the production phenomena, right? This may not indicate the well-being phenomena, right? This may not indicate whether this income which is being earned is equally distributed or not, whether every person in the country is getting the benefit of this increased production or not, right? So these are the lacunas of the economic growth. We will discuss the lacunas in much detail in the coming session. So economic growth, it indicates the expansion of the GDP of the country. This is the simplest meaning and the fundamental meaning of the growth rate. Sorry, economic growth. Economic growth means increase in the production of goods and services in an economy compared from one period to the time of another, right? It indicates yearly increase in the country's GDP or GNP in the percentage term, right? So when we are saying GDP or GNP, so we compare GDP to GDP, we compare GNP to GNP, we compare per capita income to per capita income, right? So every indicator can have its own comparison, but this comparison will be done with the reference to the previous period, right? And this will be done in the percentage term. This percentage term we will calculate after some slides in the name of economic growth rate. How do we calculate the economic growth? Then we will discuss this percentage term also. Economic growth is the positive change in the real output of the country in a particular span of period. So positive change means increment, the plus, there is increase. And in the real output means actually the quantity of production is increasing. It is not just that the prices are increasing. If just prices are increasing and the output is not increasing, then this will not indicate the economic growth. For example, if in 2019 the quantity of production is say 100 unit and price is 10 rupees each, right? So this is 1000. In 2020 the quantity remains 100 and the price goes to 11, so it becomes 1100. So can we say there is growth of 10%? Earlier it was 1000, now it is 1100. No, we cannot say there is a growth because the production, the actual output remains 100 only, right? And alternatively, in 2020, if this output goes 110 and the price remains same and the value goes 1100, in this case we can say that yes, there is the economic growth, right? So this is a clear indicator of the economic growth because the real output has increased, the quantity of production has increased. Only if the quantity of production increases, there will be extra production, there will be extra employment, there will be extra goods and services which are available to the people. The living standard of the people can increase and it can have the multiplier benefit, right? So what is important is the quantity of production should increase, not the prices, right? That is why we are saying the real output of the country is more important. Then what are the factors that contribute to the economic growth, right? So what is economic growth? Economic growth is increase in GDP. And this GDP, when we discuss the concept of national income, we clearly saw that this GDP is, if we see from the production method, this GDP depends upon the contribution of different factors, the laborers, the machinery, the capital, etc. Right? So there are different factors of production. which will contribute, and then economic growth will happen. So if we want to increase the production, or in other words, if we want to increase the economic growth, then either we have to increase the quantity or quality of the labor, right? So in India right now, there is increase in the quantity of labor. The number of young people joining the labor force is increasing. The number of people who are available to work is increasing. So this is nothing but increased quantity or supply of the labor. This can be one factor of contribution to the economic growth. Secondly, if we are not able to increase the quantity, or irrespective of the quantity, if we focus upon the quality, then also this economic growth can increase. How? For example, if earlier one person was unskilled and that person was able to contribute just 100 rupees in a day to the GDP, now the same person becomes skilled, the same person is able to contribute 150 rupees in the GDP. That means the GDP has increased by 50 rupees, right? So either you increase the quantity of labor or you increase the quality of labor. And how do we increase the quality of labor? The quality of labor can be increased by giving them a skill set, giving them good education, giving them good health condition, and so on. So there are different factors which convert this labor into what we call as the human capital, right? So this quality enhances the people, the labor becomes the human capital. Capital means something which is valuable. So the people become valuable, right? So this is one thing. Then machinery. How do we increase the machinery contribution? So the contribution of machinery can be increased by increasing the technology. So if earlier I was using 2G, now I am using 5G, then definitely my productivity is going to increase, my communication is going to increase, my speed in the IT industry is going to increase, right? So this is how we can increase the contribution of machinery through the technology, and we can increase the economic growth, right? Then capital. This capital, how can we increase the capital? So capital can be increased by two sources, either the people from the own country, that is domestic, or from the foreign country. So this domestic means the people are saving. The Indians, they are increasing the savings. So suppose they are earning 1000 rupees and they are expending 600 rupees. So they are saving 400 rupees. This was the earlier condition, and now out of 1000 rupees, they are spending just 400 rupees and now they are saving 600 rupees. So this 600 rupees, now this 600 rupees will go into the economy. It will be invested into the industry. The government will borrow it and invest into the infrastructure. So somehow this will increase the economic growth. So more the savings, more is the economic growth. Similarly, from the foreign sources, it can come. So from the foreign sources, it can come in the form of FDI, because FDI will be providing the long-term source of the capital, right? So the domestic as well as the foreign, both type of capital can be there. Then next factor is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship. How do we increase the entrepreneurship? So the government can take various initiatives. The government can promote ease of doing business, so that more and more people are interested in doing the business, because now doing the business becomes very easy thing. Or the government can promote Startup India, Stand Up India, so that more and more young people with innovative ideas, they join the business culture, right? So this entrepreneurship can also be enhanced, right? So this is, and finally the natural resources. So how can we increase the contribution of natural resources? The contribution of natural resources can be increased by increasing the resource efficiency, resource use efficiency. So if earlier I am producing 5 kilogram output from the 10 kilogram input, right? And this input I increase from 10 kilogram to 7 kilogram, right? So what is happening? That my output has actually increased. Earlier from the 10 kilogram it was 5 kilogram. Now this is from the 10 kilogram to the 7 kilogram. So my output has increased from 5 kilogram to 7 kilogram from the same input of 10 kilogram. So how is it possible? It is possible if we have latest machinery, latest technology and efficient human beings. So this natural resource also can also contribute to the economic growth. So we can see that all the factors of production, they can increase the contribution to the economic growth, right? So there can be discovery of more and more natural resources. This is also one of the possible way that the government has found some big oil well or maybe some big mine, right? And there is an increase in the quality of workforce, and there is increase in the capital and machinery, and there is an improvement in the technology. So these are the different factors that contribute to the economic growth. Now, what are the different important features of the economic growth? So first, economic growth implies the process of increase in the national income and the per capita income. So we will see at the aggregate level and at the individual level both. I already discussed this point earlier. Increase in the real income should be over a certain period. So we are actually calculating this figure between a period. So for example, between 2019 to 2020, then between 2020 to 2021. So there has to be certain period, some fixed period. It is, we can't say hypothetically or just by assumption. So there has to be some certain period, some certainty has to be there, right? Increase has to be in the real income. So this increase should not be due to inflation. So the example I have already given, that the increase in the value of goods and services produced should not be because of the increase in the prices. This should be because of increase in the quantity of production. That is called real income. The real GDP should increase. Change is reflected in the quantitative manner. Change is reflected in the quantitative manner. So we can see that earlier it was 1000, now this was 1050. So there is 5% increment. This is simple. This is it. There is no mystery. There is 5% increase. The quantity is very clear. Everyone and anyone and everyone can identify with the quantity. So we always say that this is a quantitative change. Increase in the income should be based on the increase in the productive capacity. So always productive capacity is basically when we say productive capacity increment, that means increment in the fixed assets like machinery, right? Or it can be increment in the quality of labor, right? So earlier the person was unskilled and now the person is skilled, right? So it can be either increase in the quality of technology, or it can be either increase in the quality of labor, or it can be increase in the quantity of labor, or it can be increase in the quantity of fixed asset. In any way, the productive capacity has to increase. So if earlier I was able to produce 100 units in the country, now I am able to produce 120 units, then this is in the real term the economic growth. This economic growth cannot be temporary, right? This temporary or very short term fluctuation in the value of production, that will not be counted as the economic growth. This economic growth has to be based on the production capacity. Then only we can say that this is the sustainable economic growth. Then there are various indicators. What are the various indicators of growth? So it can be in the form of increase in the national income, increase in the per capita consumption, GDP, GNP, right, and so on. So there can be different parameters, and we can compare the parameter of current year with the parameter of the last year, and we can find out how much is the change, and accordingly that will be the value of the growth. There are other indicators, CPI, WPI, that is the inflation. So inflation is also one of the way we can also link the inflation. IIP, that is index of industrial production. So this is one way how do we calculate the growth, because if there is growth in the industrial sector, then this IIP will be increasing. Then GDP, per capita income. At the international level, there are various reports we can clearly indicate. So for example, Global Competitiveness Index, which is issued by the World Economic Forum, World Development Report issued by the World Bank, Global Wages Report by the International Labour Organization. So these are the various organizations which can indicate that whether the growth is happening or not, and they are producing various kind of report, and based upon these report the growth of any country can be identified. Now, what are the aims of economic growth? So if economic growth happens, what is the impact? So economic growth happens means there is increase in the production of goods and services. Increase in the production of goods and services means when there is more production, that means more number of people will get the job. That means there will be increase in the income of the people. That means there will be increase in the tax revenue to the government. That means there will be increase in the demand, because when people have more income, they will demand more number of goods. That means there is increase in the prices or inflation, right? So this is a virtuous cycle. This is a virtuous cycle. More number of jobs, more amount of income, more tax to the government, so government can spend on the welfare activities, more demand of the goods, so there can be increase in the investment also, because when there is more demand, the industries, they tend to increase the production, they invest more amount into the fixed capital so that their income can be increased, right? So there is virtuous cycle. So there is increase in the per capita income, the employment opportunities for the people increase, the people's living standard increase, because when they are demanding more products, they are utilizing that product to consume more to increase their standard of living. Price stability also leads to the economic stability. Redistribution of income, so we have already seen the taxes are there, and then stability in the balance of payment. So definitely if there is more production, then exports also increase, and when exports increase, our foreign exchange also increases, and that means our balance of payment also increases, right? It is also positive. What is the meaning of balance of payment? We will discuss when we discuss the external chapter. Don't worry, we will discuss everything, each and every concept in detail, right? Now here we can see economic growth, that means there is high tax revenue, more public sector investment, so the government will be investing in the roads, in the railway, in the telecom, in the health, education, right? The private sector investment will also increase. The private sector will also invest more amount into construction of more number of factories, into establishing more number of machinery, etc. That means there is more productive capacity, and when there is more productive capacity, again there is economic growth. So this becomes the virtuous cycle, right? So economic growth, it is very crucial. It has a lot of benefits. At the same time, it is not free from its side effects. What are the side effects? So if there is economic growth, that means income of the people increase, they demand more amount of goods, the prices of the goods increase, and when prices of the goods increase, that has adverse impact upon the poor people. So it increases the inflation. This is the first problem. So if the growth is too fast, and there is increase in the income of the people, that means there is increase in the prices, which adversely affects the poor people. So this is the first problem. Then current account deficit, right? So when people's income are increased, their demand for the imports are also increased, and when imports are increased, that means our foreign exchange reserves are decreased, and that has a very adverse impact upon the current account deficit, right? What is the meaning of current account deficit? We will discuss in the external chapter. Don't worry, you just keep in mind that the current account deficit will be adversely impacted. Environmental cost, definitely if there is more production, more amount of raw material will be required, more pollution will be emitted from the factories, more water will be consumed, so there will be huge environmental cost. So resource consumption and the pollution will increase. Decline in living standards. So the best example is the metropolitan cities. The cities like Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta and the Chennai, and nowadays there are various other cities coming up like Bangalore and so on, right? So one general phenomena we can observe in these cities is that the income of the people is increasing, no doubt. Every person now has at least one car, one house, right? And they have a stable income. But are they really having the peace of mind? No. Most of them are in stress. They are living in someday phenomena, that one day will come and I will be happy. But today, let me work more, let me earn more income, let me have more bank balance, right? So the dissatisfaction is increasing, the health problems are increasing, the people are moving from the rural areas to the selected number of cities. That means there is more congestion, there are traffic jams, the people are spending 20% of their awake time in just traveling, which is unproductive. Crimes are increasing because some people are earning huge amount, some people are increasing very less amount. So this difference in the income of the people is leading to some people doing the crime to earn more and more income and show that I am also not less than you, right? So the crimes are increasing, the pollution is increasing, the people are being egoistic. So the 5 people are traveling from the same street to the same place. Their origination and destination is same, but still they are using 5 different cars. They are moving at the same time, they start at the same time, they reach at the same time, the starting point is same, the ending point is same, but they use different cars just because they don't want to look someone who is dependent on other. So nowadays we are becoming more and more independent, and this independence is actually increasing the disconnection among the people. There is a race going on. Our bank balance are increasing, but the peace of mind is decreasing. Our fat is increasing, but the people's place in our heart is decreasing. So this is a very crucial thing. So in a way, we think that we are earning more amount of money so that we can live better life, but actually the quality of life is deteriorating. The living standard is actually deteriorating. It is not increasing, except for few people. Now coming to the types of economic growth, right? So before I discuss this concept, I would like to touch on a small concept, that if we calculate the GDP, we can calculate the GDP by different methods. It can be either production method, income method or expenditure method. And when we calculate this GDP by the expenditure method, when I calculate this by the expenditure method, then what is the formula? The formula is the private final consumption expenditure plus the government final consumption expenditure plus the net investment plus the net exports, right? So this private final consumption expenditure actually indicates the demand or consumption by the household. This indicates the government demand or government consumption. This indicates increase in the fixed assets, and this indicates the net export, that is export minus the import, right? So now we say that economic growth is nothing but the increase in the GDP, right? So if this GDP has to increase, that means out of these four factor, either one or more than one will increase, then only the GDP can increase, right? I'm repeating. So if this GDP has to increase, or if economic growth has to happen, then either of these four variables have to increase. So either one or more than one variable has to increase. That is very clear, right? So now, if this increase in GDP is because of increase in this demand or consumption by the individual household, then this is called consumption led growth, right? So when GDP increases because of the increase in the consumption, this is consumption led growth. When this increases because of the increase in the investment, then this is called investment led growth. Please understand this concept very carefully, because in the newspapers you will find a lot of time these terms: consumption led growth, investment led growth, right? And when there is increase in the net export, then this is called export led growth. Export led growth. Now can we see the example? This consumption led growth is happening in India. In India we have a lot of demand. That is why even if there is slowdown in the world, the best example is 2008 USA slowdown, which resulted into the global slowdown. Even that slowdown did not impact the economy of India much, because India is self-sufficient, self-sustainable. The GDP growth of India is more coming from the domestic consumption. There is so much population, all of them demand certain minimum goods. So in India the GDP will not go down beyond a certain level. And do you know how much is the contribution of this consumption led growth in India? This is 60%. Approximately 60% of the GDP is because of the domestic demand only, right? Then investment led growth. Investment led growth, that India should actually now move from the consumption to the investment led growth. At present this investment is happening at a very low rate. This is approximately between 25% to 30% in India. So investment growth rate is very low. Export led growth, this is also very low. But can you give some best example of export led growth in the world? Which country really enjoyed this export led growth? Right? So the very simple example is China, and there are various Southeast Asian countries also, like Hong Kong, Singapore, etc. South Korea, Japan, all of them actually enjoyed the export led growth only. Economic survey very clearly mentioned last year in 2017-18 that China enjoyed export growth rate of more than 10% for over 30 years. So China is the best example of the export led growth, right? So this growth can flow from the consumption, it can flow from the investment, or it can flow from the export. So it can be consumption led growth, investment led growth, or export led growth. So these are the different types of the economic growth, right? And we will see many more types. So export led growth we discussed. So what are the benefits? It also has a positive impact upon the current account surplus. Our foreign exchange also increase, because when we are exporting, that means we are receiving the payment in the foreign currency. Consumption led growth, India commodity exports based growth. This is also one of the example of the exports based growth, because in this case it is not the production but the availability of the rich and scarce resources which is making these exports possible. The best example are the countries like Saudi Arabia, which is having the oil, Cuba because of the sugar, Congo because of the oil and the natural resources. So these countries are enjoying some of the rich resources which they export and their growth is happening. So this is called commodity exports based growth. So this is also one type of the export led growth only, but this is happening not because of the production but because of the availability of the some very rich resources. Then balanced growth. What is the meaning of balanced growth? So when there are not much booms and busts, so when this growth is happening consistently, right? This growth is not happening like this. Sometimes the growth rate is 10%, sometimes the growth rate is minus 5%. No, that kind of growth is not balanced growth. Sustainable growth. So growth which is balanced and environmentally sustainable. That means the production is being environment friendly, right? The carbon footprint is minimized. The carbon footprint is minimized. In this case, this is called the sustainable growth. There is one more term, inclusive growth. So this inclusive growth means very simple, when the outcome of the economic growth are shared among all. When the output of the economic growth are shared among all equally, there is fair distribution of the economic growth outcome, then this is called inclusive growth. So this includes everyone. This includes the poor people, the women, the minorities, the people who are excluded because of the caste, and so on. So this is called inclusive growth. Now I am little bit I'm going to discuss this export led growth a little bit more, because this is actually crucial. So export led growth, it comes from when a significant part of the expansion happens in the real GDP, jobs and per capita income because of the export of goods and services. There are various countries like China, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Ethiopia, and so on. Advantages, what are the advantages? So advantages is, first, there is injection into the circular flow of income. So I hope you remember this circular flow of income concept from the national income chapter. So when exports are happening, that means the income is coming from the outside world. Raise per capita income and reduce the extreme poverty. Increase in the capital investment, right? So when more and more amount is received, the income of the people increase, their savings increase, then that saving actually goes to the investment. What are the export risk associated with the export led growth? So can you think? I'm giving you 30 seconds. So this export is actually based upon the buying capacity and willingness of some other country, right? Only when they have the capacity and they have the willingness, then only they will import, they will buy our product. So if at any point of time either they don't have the capacity or they don't have the willingness, right? Or in other words, they are not able to buy because their economy is actually not doing well. For example, in 2008 the global economy is not doing well, especially the Western countries like USA and the UK and the other European countries. So when they are not doing well, they will not buy. So that has an adverse impact upon the country like China. And sometimes even if they have the capacity but they are not willing. So why they are not willing? They are not willing because they want to provide the job opportunities to their own people. They want to promote their domestic industries. And this situation can be noticed in the recent couple of years. So the countries like USA, they are promoting the protectionist policies, right? So this protectionism is happening around the world, right? So this protectionism is actually an indicator of the reducing willingness of the countries to import from the outside countries, right? So this capacity and willingness, both of these are actually the risk. So our country can become over dependent on the economic cycle of the trade partner countries. For example, if China was exporting majority of its product to the European countries and the USA in 2008, and the USA went down, that means the economic cycle of the USA is actually adversely affected the China economy. The policy of protectionism, as I discussed, that it is happening in recent times. Demand pull inflation. So this can happen when I am exporting some product, and because of this export, the domestic availability becomes less. So for example, when there is a crisis in the onion production, right, at that time, if I start exporting that onion, so what will be the impact? The domestic availability is already less. Now this domestic availability will become further less. So this will lead to the demand pull inflation. The demand is more and the supply is less. The demand can increase because of the because of the extra export, but supply cannot increase suddenly. It takes time to increase the supply. That is why this demand pull inflation happens. Then more and more export can actually be harmful for the local resources. So if some country is having high natural resources and it is exporting all of its natural resources, then at one point of time it will be completely insolvent. It will be dependent upon the other country for the same resource which it was exporting. So this unsustainable extraction of the natural resources, it can actually impact the long-term balanced growth. So these are the potential risks and drawbacks from the export-led growth. Now, how do we calculate the economic growth rate? So we have discussed economic growth. This economic growth is actually calculated in the form of economic growth rate. So how do we calculate? The calculation is very simple. We take the GDP of the current year. For example, this is 1050, and we reduce the GDP of the previous year. For example, this is 1000, and we divide by the GDP of the previous year, and the figure comes as 5% actually. This is 5%. This is the economic growth rate. So this comes in the percentage term, right? And here we are comparing year on year. So economic growth rate is the percentage change in the value of all the goods and services produced in a nation during a specific period. So a specific period is, for example, 1 year as compared to an earlier period. It measures the comparative health, right? So the health between the 2019 versus 2020 by comparing one quarter, right? This is very crucial, one quarter. So we are comparing the quarter 1 of 2019 with the quarter 1 of the 2020. The numbers are usually compiled and reported quarterly and annually. So this calculation happens both quarterly and annually. It is driven by 4 components of the GDP. We have already seen the private final consumption expenditure, the government final consumption expenditure, the net investment, and finally the net exports. So these are the 4 components which drive the economic growth. And if GDP has to increase, if growth has to happen, that one or more of these variables has to increase. We have already seen different kinds of growth: the consumption led growth, the investment led growth, and export led growth. It indicates the direction and magnitude of the economic growth. Direction means whether there is an increase or decrease, right? So it is quite possible that production has decreased. So in that case, this will be the negative growth. There is growth, but this growth is not the positive growth. Technically, it is not the growth. It is a decline, but still we call it the negative growth. And magnitude means quantum, whether this is single digit or this is double digit, right? Economic growth refers to the positive change in the economic output, but changes in the economic output can be either positive or negative. So both the cases are possible. If the economy begins to shrink, the percentage raised can be expressed in the negative to demonstrate the income lost over the time period being the examined, right? So we have to be very, very clear that economic growth rate can be negative also, right? So economic growth rate, when it is negative, it will actually indicate the reduction in the value of goods and services being produced compared to the previous year. Real economic growth rate, real, right? So what is this real? Real basically means, if we compare it with the nominal, so nominal is which is considering the current prices, right? And real means which is considering the base year prices, right? So real economic growth rate means that there has to be increase in the output, not just increase in the prices. So real economic growth rate takes into account the effects of inflation. So we are adjusting the inflation, and this is considered to be much better measure of growth compared to the nominal growth rate, because here the real quantity of production increases. Now, what is the system of calculation of economic growth in India? So CSO, the Central Statistics Office, calculates the GDP in India, and this is under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in the Union Government. There is year-on-year comparison. As I discussed, that Q1 of 2019 it is compared to the Q1 of the 2020, right? So year on year, the same quarter, the same period will be compared with the previous year. And the data for this calculation is collected with the help of Annual Survey of Industries, and more recently now we are considering the data of the MCA, Ministry of Corporate Affairs 21. This is the portal of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which takes into account the data which is submitted by the different companies with the government. So the different companies, the registered companies, they are submitting the data to the government that we did this much of production, we made this much of value of the goods and services, and accordingly we also calculate the GDP of the country. And there are also various indices like CPI, IIP. Based upon that also we calculate the economic growth rate. So in India there are two different methods which can be used for calculating the economic growth rate. So either it can be based on the economic activity. Economic activity means we are calculating the GDP at the production method, or it can be based on the expenditure method or at the market prices, right? So expenditure is at the market prices considering the taxes, etc. Economic activity is at the factor cost, which ignores the taxes. The factor cost method is it assesses the performance of 8 different sectors or industries. And the expenditure method, it indicates how the different areas of the economy like trade, the investment, the personal consumption, they are doing, like the 4 components that we discussed, right? So from the factor method we actually see that which kind of industries are contributing, whether this is agriculture or industry or transport, and so we see actually from the supply side, and in the expenditure side we see from the expenditure side that who is actually doing the expenses. Factor cost method, so it considers 8 different industrial sectors: agriculture, forestry and fishery, mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water supply, construction, trade, hotel, transport and communication, financing, insurance, real estate and business services, community, social and personal services. Friends, you are not supposed to remember all these names. You just keep in mind that these 8 sectors are including the primary, secondary and tertiary. So all these sectors, primary, secondary and tertiary, all 3 sectors are part of the this factor cost method. So this is how we calculate. So this is the paper that I have taken from the government sources. So here you can see that the previous year quarter 2 and the present year quarter 2, the 2 different figures have been taken. So we are calculating year on year, and here we can see agriculture, forestry and fishery, mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water supply, construction, trade, hotels, transport and communication, financing, insurance, real estate, business services, community, social and personal services. Here we can compare the 2, and based upon this comparison we can see the percentage change as compared to the previous year. So compared to the previous year, in the quarter 2 there is 3.2 percentage growth. Here this is minus 2.9, so this is actually decline, negative growth, right? And so on. So here the maximum growth is in the financing, insurance, real estate and the business services, and overall growth is GDP at the factor cost, the 6.9%, right? So this is overall growth. So this is how we calculate the economic growth rate with the help of the expenditure method. With the help of the factor method. Now expenditure method, here we have already seen these 4 variables. So how do we calculate? We pick up the figure of the previous year and figure of the present year of the same quarter, right? And here we can see the private final consumption expenditure, the government final consumption expenditure, the gross fixed capital formation, and these are actually included in the same category, which represents the investment, then net exports, right? So these are the 4 category: A, B, C, D. So these are the 4 variables, right? So here we can see the composition. If we see the composition wise, the maximum contribution belongs to the private final consumption. It is approximately 60%. Approximately 10% belongs to the government. Approximately 32% belongs to the investment, and then it becomes approximately 30%, and rest approximately rest actually belongs to the net export. So if we see net export, it is actually negative, right? Net export is actually negative. So our growth is not actually export led growth. We are under the burden of import led consumption actually, right? So here we can see that we saw the composition of different variables. However, the point is that if we want to calculate the growth, then we have to compare between 2, and then we have to calculate the percentage change, and that will be the economic growth rate, right? This 59%, 10.9%, 32%, these are not the economic growth rate. These are just indicating the composition of the different variables. So expenditure method, the benefit is that it actually provides the insight into like which part is contributing most to the economy, right? What are the timelines for the India's GDP calculation? So every quarter data is given with a lag of 2 months. So for example, if we have to calculate the 30th September data, so this will be given by 30th November. So till 30th November this data will be released. So data of the 30th September will be released on the 30th of November. Annual GDP data, it is published on May 31. Again, this is with the 2 months lag, because the year ends on March 31. So from March 31 to May 31, there are 2 years, right? So it is a lag of 2 months. In India, we follow the financial year from April to March schedule, right? Now, which is better measure of economic growth? Is this the GDP? GDP means aggregate measure, or per capita income, that is at the individual level. So which one of these is the better measure? The question is, which one of these is the better measure? So what do you think? Take 30 seconds and then you decide which one of them is considered to be the better. So I would say first we have to understand, right? So aggregate, suppose in 2019 and 2020, this aggregate production was 1000 rupees and the individual production was 1 rupee. In 2020, the aggregate production was 150, 1. So in the aggregate term, there is increase in the GDP or there is economic growth, but at the per capita level, there is actually decrease. So at the individual level, the income has actually decreased during this 1 year. At the aggregate level, there is increase, but at the individual level, there is decrease. So now I am asking you whether we should go for the aggregate or should we go for the individual. The answer is very clear. We should go for the individual or per capita, because if per capita income is decreasing, how can we say that our economic growth is happening? So we will calculate by both aggregate and individual. But if we really want to check whether we are growing or not, the best measure is the per capita income, because this population growth rate, if the population growth rate is more than the aggregate income growth rate, in that case the individuals are going to suffer, right? This per capita income actually considers this increase in the population. So this increase in the population is actually has to be considered because it impacts the individuals. So economic growth is measured on the basis of expansion of GDP. However, there are instances when the rate of population growth is higher than the rate of increase in the GDP. In such instances, the GDP increase while with per capita income decreases, right? So GDP increases but per capita income decreases. So the best measure is the per capita income. So if you find a question in the examination, please mark this per capita income as the best measure as compared to the GDP or the aggregate measure. What is economic development? So we have discussed economic growth. Now what is development? So I am giving you 30 seconds to think about it. Just think and then we will discuss. So in the previous session we discussed economic growth, and in simplest terms this economic growth is nothing but increase in the GDP compared to the previous year, right? So this is growth. From growth to development, first thing is that this increase in GDP is also part of the development. So this development is much more broader than the economic growth. This increase in GDP is required for the development. And when you hear about the term development, what comes to your mind? So naturally, what comes to the mind is increase in the standard of living. And when I say increase in the standard of living, that means increase in the health, increase in the education, right? Increase in the availability of the housing facility, increase in the public facilities, nutrition, and so on. So this is what development means. So can you see that this development is very broad term. This deals with that how increase in GDP is impacting the quality of life of the people. So this increase in GDP is quantitative and development is qualitative. Development is qualitative, right? So economic development is combining economic growth plus increase in the living standard of the people, right? So economic development is much bigger term than the economic growth. And can you see that economic growth is the essential thing for economic development to happen? If we don't have the increase in GDP, that means if we don't have increase in the income, then how can we increase the health standard? How can we increase the education? How can we increase the more number of houses? So increase in economic growth is essential. At the same time, increase in economic growth is not sufficient. So it is not just economic growth, but more than that, the willingness of the people, certain standards, certain intervention by the government, that the growth that is happening should go to all sections of society, should reach out to maximum number of people, should reach out to the people at the bottom, that should reach out to the poor people, the people who have been left from the process of development. So not only the quantity, the quality is also required. Not only the market involvement, but the government involvement is also required, right? So this development is much broader term. So let us see economic development. It involves the rise in the level of production, that is nothing but economic growth, along with advancement of technology, improvement in the living standard, right? So this technological advancement is also part of the economic development. There is an improvement in the life expectancy rate. So earlier the people used to live for average 35 years. Now their life expectancy is more than 65 years. Infant mortality rate, IMR, the number of children who will survive for more than 1 year. Literacy rate, poverty rate, all of them will improve. So it will it will actually show that every parameter is increasing, not just the economic growth. It is a long-term process, so it is not a short-term process. It is not that this year the production is increasing, next year all of these parameters like life expectancy, IMR, literacy rate, poverty rate, all of them will increase. No, it will not happen suddenly. It will take a lot of time, because schools have to be built up, hospitals have to be built up, the staff has to be trained, certain government schemes have to be there, and all this takes a lot of time. Changes reflected are qualitative and quantitative, right? So qualitative, one thing which I talk about quality is that there is not just increase in the production, but this increase in the production also reflects change in the structure of economy. So please listen to this very carefully. Change in the structure of economy. Now when I say change in the structure, what does that mean? Change in the structure means that earlier our majority of the production was coming from the agriculture. Now majority of the production is coming from the service sector. So this structural change from the agricultural dominance to the service sector dominance actually shows that we are now developing, right? So this development has to be structural, not just that only the agricultural production is increased. Now earlier it was 100 unit, now it is 110 unit. No, we are saying that this 110 unit has to be there, but at the same time more efficient sector, the manufacturing sector, the service sector, they should produce more and more goods, so that there is more efficient utilization of services, more efficient utilization of resources, and there is high per capita income. So this change in structure is very, very important. It is a continuous process. So it is not for a certain limited to the certain time. So it is not limited to a certain period. It is focused on balanced and equitable distribution of the wealth among all the individuals. Balanced means it is consistent, like it happens over a period of time. The growth rate is sustained over a long period of time, and there is equal distribution, right? So economic development, in a way we can say that this is a combination of high economic growth, which is sustainable, which is balanced, and which is inclusive. So all of these, the high economic growth, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive, all of them have to happen simultaneously. Can you think of certain indicators of development? So the development can be in the form of real income of the people is increasing, the per capita income, the literacy is increasing, the educational standards are increasing, right? Improvement in the quality and availability of the housing, then improvement in the level of environmental standard, the pollution is decreasing, the water quality is improving, the life expectancy is improving. So all these can be the indicators, and there are various international benchmarks also. What are these international benchmarks? So some of the important benchmarks can be rule of law index, which is given by the World Justice Project, Human Development Index, which is given by the United Nations Development Program, Human Capital Index, which is given by the World Bank, a World Happiness Report, which is given by the United Nations SDSN, and World Press Freedom Index, Reporters Without Borders. So here we can see that rule of law, human development, human capital, happiness, press freedom, all of these are also part of the economic development, right? So this development has to be comprehensive. Now, what are the certain factors which affect the economic development? It can be inflation, right? So if there is high inflation, it can adversely impact the economic development because it will actually disturb the buying capacity of the consumer. Tax levels. So if there are high tax levels, then it will decrease the demand. Interest rate, it can impact the growth of the industry because if there is high interest rate, then the cost of the production will be more. If the cost of the production is more, then the prices will be more, then demand will be reduced. Government policies, they can also promote the friendly environment for business to move into the operate within the community. So in the recent term, there is a huge improvement in the ease of doing business. So government is taking various steps. For example, reduction in the corporate tax rates, coming up with various laws, and giving a lot of freedom to the business so that they can do the business freely, right? So this kind of government policies are also part of the economic development. Then strength of the currency, that how much strength Indian currency has as compared to the international currency, that is the dollar. If the rupee is strong, rupees neither too much appreciated, neither too much depreciated, then we think that economic development is happening, right? Because that is having maintaining the balance between the export and import value. Government intervention that is required for the safety of the people, the consumers, the employees, and natural resources. So the government has come up with various labor laws in the recent times which talk about the wages, occupational health and safety, the social security. The government has also come up with various laws for employees, for increasing the participation of the women employees, so that there is more and more gender, this female labor force participation rate is increased. So all these initiatives are also part of the economic development. So economic development is a very comprehensive term. Overall economic health, the consumer confidence, economic state of the country. So if we talk about the economic state, so there has to be stability. People should obey the rule of the law. There should be stability in terms of minimum crime, maximum adherence to the rules and regulations. People are paying the taxes, and there is no extortion, there is no role of the underworld. So all these things have to be there so that the business can flourish and people can actually get the benefit. Then social and cultural values should also be taken care. For example, if we want to establish some project in the tribal areas, we should actually take care of their interest. So these social and cultural values should also be taken care. FDI is attracted naturally. More and more people want to invest in a country where there is all-round economic development, because their investment is safe and their investment will always progress in that country. Now, very important, what is the difference between the economic growth and the economic development? So I am giving you 1 minute. Please think what are the different areas where we can differentiate between the economic growth and development, and after that we will discuss in detail. So what are the differences in the economic growth and development? Let us see and start with the definition. So economic growth, it is just the positive quantitative change in the output of an economy in a particular period of time. So positive and quantitative, it do not deal with the quality. Economic development, it considers the rise in the output, right? So quantitative change is also part of the economic development, along with advancement in the human development index, rise in the living standards, advancement in the technology, and overall happiness index, right? So this economic development is a very comprehensive term. Now concept. Economic growth is narrow. Yeah, it is narrow. Why it is narrow? Because it only talks about income parameter. It ignores environment, social aspect, inequality. It ignores health, education, housing, right? So economic growth is considering only and only the income part. Economic development, it is much broader because it talks about all these things which are missed in the economic growth. At the same time, economic development mostly it is structural change in the economy. What is structural change? That means the country is moving from agriculture based economy to the industrial based economy, and from industry to the service sector economy. So we can see the examples like USA. Earlier they used to be the agricultural based countries, then they became the industrialist country, and now they are the service based economy, right? So this structural change is also a reflection of the economic development. This structural change can be in another form, that the role of women is increased, right? The consumption of the resources also is decreased. So these kinds of structural change can also be included in the economic development. Then economic growth is quantitative. It is qualitative. We have already seen. Economic growth, what are the parameters? The parameters can be in the form of GDP, GNP, FDI, FII. Economic development, It talks about life expectancy, infant mortality rate, improvement in the literacy rate, poverty rate, etc. So economic development is much more comprehensive, much more dimensional. This is short term in nature. So economic growth we actually trace between quarter to quarter, right? So between quarter to quarter there can be difference in the economic growth rate, and as far as economic development is concerned, it is talking about the long term. So we always compare what was the economic development in 1991 and what this is in the 2020. So this difference we can see only in case of the economic development. In case of economic growth, this kind of comparison is not required. Economic development takes a lot of time to happen. Applicability. Economic growth is more a phenomenon of the developed nations. They have already developed themselves, so now they just need to maintain the momentum. But economic development is more relevant for the developing countries like India. We need to talk more about it because we have yet to bring it out. How do we measure? The best measure for the economic growth is national income or GDP, and best measure of economic development is real, that is inflation adjusted per capita income, that is income at the individual level. Frequency of occurrence. Economic growth, it takes place in a certain period of time, so there is a certain fixed period. But economic development, it is a process phenomena. So this is a time phenomena and this is a process phenomena. It takes time. Economic development takes time. It is an automatic process and it does not require much of the government intervention because the market themselves will grow. So it is more of the market phenomena. However, economic development, this is more dependent upon the government intervention, because the government will intervene that all the goods and services which are being produced in the country, they should be equally distributed in the people. Economic growth, it does not emphasize on the fair and equal distribution of wealth, but economic development is actually focuses on balanced and equitable distribution of the wealth among the individuals, and it try to uplift the downgraded societies. Here you can see that if we see two parameter, luxury goods, which is more about the growth, and education, which is an indicator of development, right? Now in this paragraph, in this diagram, luxury goods are increasing, but education do not change. So it means only growth is happening. So this phenomena happens in the developed nations like USA, because in the USA education level has already saturated. They are already having 100%, almost 100% literacy, but their luxury goods will keep increasing. That is why they will require only growth. Here in this next diagram you can see that luxury goods remain same, but education is increasing. So this can be the phenomena of the country. So can we say that economic development, it deals with the interventions which promote human capital, literacy ratio, infrastructure, health and general welfare. So it is comprehensive in nature. Economic growth, it is a phenomena which talks about market productivity and rise in the GDP, right? Market productivity and rise in the GDP. So we have seen many things about economic growth, but there are few things which I discussed verbally and here I am giving in the written form. So you can see economic growth is single dimensional, which focuses upon increase in output alone, right? So increase in output is the prime parameter. It is spontaneous in character. Spontaneous means it is not long term. Discontinuous, it is not necessarily continuous. And growth is possible without development. Yes, it is quite possible. There are a lot of examples when growth happens, but corresponding development do not happen. Determinant of economic growth may be economic development. Yes. So if economic development is happening, then we can say that economic growth is also happening. Economic growth is not possible with, economic development is not possible without economic growth. So this is very, very crucial. So without economic growth, economic development is not possible. Economic growth is subset of economic development, right? So I think now the concept is very, very clear to you. Economic development, some things about the economic development, it is much broader than the economic growth, and economic development is equal to the economic growth plus the standard of living, right? Can we say that? Yes, we can say that. Economic development is considered as the multidimensional phenomena. It talks about the qualitative changes in the composition and distribution of income. Composition means from agriculture to industry, from industry to service sector, and so on. And distribution instead of just man, this is now also belonging to the females. Per capita income and change in the functional capacities. Change in the functional capacities means now the people's skills have been developed. Gradual and steady change in the long term. So as I said that development takes time. Growth to some extent is essential for development. Yes, it is very, very crucial. Without growth, development is not possible. Economic growth, now this is very crucial, that if we see economic growth is calculated based upon what? GDP. And GDP is considering only the formal sector. It ignores informal sector, right? It ignores the informal sector. Now this economic development, it takes into account all the activities, whether formal or informal, and it is much more comprehensive, right? Next, economic growth, it does not reflect whether there is a depletion in the natural resources. So it does not take care of the environment. But economic development is concerned with the sustainability, right? It talks about the meeting the needs of present without compromising the needs of the future generations. So economic growth is short term, talks about the present generation. Economic development is long term, talks about the future generation also, right? So economic growth is concerned about the development of present generation only. Economic development is concerned about sustainable growth and development. Amartya Sen's views regarding the economic development and growth. So you can quote this quotation at different places in your essay, in your mains answers, in your interview. So what Amartya Sen is saying that economic growth is not an end in itself. Yes. So economic growth is just a means. It is just a means. It is not the end in itself, and has to enhance the lives of the people lead and the freedoms that they enjoy, right? So the entire purpose of economic growth is that people enhance their lives and they enjoy more and more freedom, right? And Amartya Sen came up with the capability approach. Amartya Sen said that what matters is that capability to function is provided to each and every person. Capability basically means the freedom in choice of functioning. And what is functioning? That what a person does with the commodity of given characteristic that they process or control. The simple meaning is that the person should be able to choose the profession he or she want to pursue, and the person should be made capable to pursue that particular profession or occupation in a more efficient way, right? So people should be free to choose, and they should be made capable to perform that particular function so that they can lead their life in a better way, and they can lead their life with complete freedom, right? So this is what Amartya Sen says. So with this, I think you are very much clear about what is the meaning of economic growth and what are the differences compared to the economic development. This static portion is completely done, right? As far as current portion is concerned, we will deal that separately along with the current economic survey, budget and the current affairs, because the current portion is always changing. I will also discuss the previous year questions in the separate session so that you can be confident, and we will also solve some good practice questions also. Thank you very much.